bit of some appalling personal history. I was born in India, and when the Indians got control of their own country, my family took me somewhere where whites were still in charge, South Africa. I was brought up in South Africa. I went briefly to what we call a public school in England, which is really a private school, and then to Cambridge and back to South Africa, to my country. A classic colonial upbringing with all its limitations and all its blind spots. I loved my country deeply. We're talking now the early 60s, and it was a time when the pressure was starting to build. Internationally, people were becoming aware of this thing called apartheid and were reacting against it. My country was under pressure. At about that time, an extraordinary narrative developed in government circles and in certain intellectual circles. And it ran like this. You've got it completely wrong. You don't understand what apartheid is. What it really means is separate development. And we're doing all these wonderful things. We're creating homelands which are going to be independent nations where black South Africans, they didn't call them black South Africans, they called them Bantu, which is actually the word for people in 3 Southern African languages. It's a nice neutral word. But these homelands where they will have complete independence and a form of government based on their own traditions, which is a combination of voting and traditional headmen and chieftains having a retained power. Then we've got this wonderful thing called Bantu education. Instead of imposing the alien Oxford and Cambridge structure on teaching and those exams, they're going to be taught in their mother tongue and taught about their own traditions and so forth and so forth. And, you know, this is really an anti-colonial policy. As one gentleman said to me, you know, we're actually in tune with the sort of black power movement that's now developing in the United States. Well, I fell for this gaffe completely. Such things can happen with love of country. And I'd made one documentary while I was at university, and I went to a function in Pretoria where some characters were present from the Ministry of Information, for that read, the Department of Propaganda, and I berated them about all these wonderful things that they should be telling the world. So they said, all right, and they gave me a small sum of money to go out and make a film on these issues. So out of this kid comes out of this, you know, little cocoon where he's lived, and for the first time in his life goes to African townships, meets people, goes to these independent or quasi-independent homelands, and the whole experience was absolutely traumatic. I'm glad to say, and I don't know why, maybe it was because of my youth then, that black people didn't treat me with scorn as they should have done, but actually one particular elderly gentleman from the ANC took me under his wing, and they revealed things to me that I had no knowledge of. I was in private homes, I was in hospitals, I went to funerals and so on. Well, long and the short of this story is that as late as October, I think it's October 63, I was still on afternoon tea terms with the then Prime Minister, Dr. Verwoerd, and in 64 January, I was in jail for a brief period. I came to England, and I had this whole experience, apart from the shame and the guilt of it, it really did shape one for the rest of one's life. And the rules in my own head were never to make a documentary just on the basis of your reading or today what you get off the internet. Go on the ground, see how people actually experience it, what is happening. Now I know that the idea of apartheid being a concern with the development of black people is about as way out as you can get, but there are so many ideologies, political and religious, where the gap between the propaganda and the intention and the reality is very huge. And I wanted to make films where I would absolutely, you know, deal with how people experienced it, get into the lives of ordinary people living through this, whether it's joining some dangerous religious movement or living under a certain regime. And I didn't want to just do it on the level of the victims. I was interested in the middle level people. I mean, like that lady there who was teaching that class about the difference between whites and blacks. Like me, I mean, I was in that situation. get inside her head, discover the compromises that she's made, spend time with her and her equivalents, and finally try to get right to the top. And I have had some extraordinary experiences with some of the nastier dictators and gangsters and religious leaders. And I'm not, I'm not really there to sort of spit at them. I'm there to try to make discoveries about them. And of course, one of the early discoveries is there but for the grace of God. And it's also interesting to me, those that are particularly dishonest, how much of that dishonesty is actually sort of corroded their own souls, how much they've come to the point where they actually believe their own lies. How innocent are they? So all these things have been sort of mulling around in my head, coming out of that early experience. And I'm enormously grateful to television for giving me these 40 years where I can explore these themes and in many different directions. And sort of enormously grateful to audiences that this idea of being down there on the ground floor of human experience is something that people watch. And I think finally the thing is that I don't think, in my own view, that it's the purpose of a documentary filmmaker to sort of find answers, to QED, to lead people along. Leave that for the corporate videos and the rest of it. I think what we must do is just answer questions, unravel, and just share an experience with people. You know, if I've had the privilege of being in a certain society for X months of research and filming, let me try to capture the essence of what I've been through and pass it on to people. So that briefly, if you forgive all this, is the sort of manifesto, really.
I think one of the